Marta Halvorsen did not cry when the paper came. It was a printed form. That was the first cruelty of it. The rural carrier brought it the last 11 miles out to the Milk River bench, and he would not meet her eye when he handed it across the gate. It was a War Department form, and the blanks had been typed in by some clerk she would never meet, typed in over the name of the Adjutant General. A stranger's signature stamped at the bottom. Private Anders Halvorsen, killed in action. October, the Meuse Argonne. She read the date. She read it twice. Then she folded the paper into the band of her apron, the way you fold a thing you mean to keep, and she went back inside to her children. She did not weep on that step. Understand that. She read the date, and she folded the paper, and she kept her back straight the whole way to the door. 8 weeks. That was how long it took the line to empty. Down 60 miles of the Great Northern, the sale bills started climbing the grain elevator walls like frost creeping up a window. Team and harness, cookstove and churn. 200 widows on that one railroad, all of them selling, all of them going home to their mothers back east. And when the land locator came to Marta's gate, a soft-handed man named Royce Dunmore, with the filing fee already folded in his coat pocket, he did not even lower his voice. "Grief plows nothing, Mrs. Halvorsen," he said. "Sign the bill and go home to your mother." The next morning, before the frost was off the glass, Marta Halvorsen walked 11 miles to the courthouse. Not to mourn. She went to read one paragraph. One paragraph her husband had filed 9 years before and never once mentioned again. If you believe quiet people read the fine print, this story is for you. Before we go on, subscribe, and while you're down there, comment the state you're watching from. I want to see how far down the line this story travels. Now let me tell it to you the way it happened. They came out to the bench in the spring of 1910. Marta was 25 then, and Anders was 28, and between them they had a wedding chest, a borrowed team, and a filing on 320 acres under the enlarged homestead entry. 320 acres. It sounds like wealth. It was not wealth. It was gumbo and buffalo grass and a wind that never fully stopped out on the flat above the Milk River, near a siding called Courthouse that had a water tower, a store, and a church, and not much reason for any of the three. You have to understand what the entry asked of them. The government did not give land to the patient. It gave land to the proved up. You filed, and then you had years to earn it, to live on it, to build on it, and to break the sod and put in a crop, so many acres by such a year. Or the claim lapsed and the ground went back to be filed by the next hungry soul who came down the line. That was the bargain. Blood and sweat, measured in broken acres, against a piece of paper that said the land was yours. Anders was a breaking fool for it. That's the only word. He'd be out behind the borrowed team from the gray before dawn to the gray after dusk. The sod peeling up off the share in long black curls that had never once seen the sun. First year they broke 40 acres and the second year 60, and the shack went up, and then the soddy barn. And then a real barn with real lumber freighted in from Glasgow at a price that made Marta's teeth ache. Joran came in the spring of 1911. Lars came in the winter of 1914, in a blizzard, with the neighbor woman 2 hours late through the drifts. They lost a crop to hail in 12. They lost one to drought in 15. They kept going. That was the whole of it. They kept going. Marta remembered a night on the steppe, the summer before the war took him. Anders had his pipe, and the fields were just showing green, and he said the thing she'd carry the rest of her life. "One more good year, Marta," he said. "We put in a full crop that spring, we prove it up, and this ground is ours for good. Nobody can ever take it then." A full crop. She'd said it back to him like a promise. A full crop. Then the war came across the water, and Anders came in one evening in the summer of 1917 with a set to his jaw she knew, and said the country was asking, and a man who'd taken land from that country ought to answer when it asked. She did not argue. That was not their way. She sewed the buttons on his coat, and she stood at the corliss siding with Joran's hand in one of hers and Lars on her hip. And she watched the train take her husband east, and then further east than east, all the way to France. He wrote when he could. The letters were short and the handwriting got worse, and then, that autumn, they stopped. And the bells rang in November, the armistice, the whole world let out its breath, the church at Corliss rang its one bell until the rope man's arms gave out. And Marta let herself believe. For 11 days she let herself believe he was coming home. The printed form came on the 12th day, killed in action. October, before the bells. He had already been in the ground in France a full month while she stood in Corliss and let herself hope. That was the arithmetic of it, and she did that arithmetic standing at her own gate. And it is a hard thing to have done to a person. But she folded the paper into her apron band and she went in to feed her children. Because they were hungry, and hunger does not pause for grief. That is the first thing you learn on the bench. Hunger does not pause. Now here is where the line began to go. The sale bills. I told you about the sale bills. Within a few weeks of the telegrams, the sale bills went up on the elevator wall in Corliss, and then Marta saw them in Vandalia when she went for flour, and folks said they were up in Glasgow too, and Hinsdale, and clear down the line. Public auction. Everything must go. And every bill had a widow's name at the top of it, and Marta knew most of the names. 200 telegrams had come down that one railroad that winter. 200. And now 200 sales were following them like crows follow a plow. Selma Ostgard was the first one near Marta to go. Selma had the quarter section 3 miles east, and she'd lost her Torvald the same week Marta lost Anders, the same printed form, the same typed blanks over the same stamped name. Marta drove over the morning of Selma's sale, and she found the yard full of neighbors and strangers, and Selma standing by her cookstove with her hand flat on the warming shelf like she was saying goodbye to something living. "Come with me, Marta," Selma said. "There's a train Thursday. My sister's in Minnesota. There's nothing here for us now. There was never anything here but them, and now they're gone, and the ground's just ground." They loaded Selma's cookstove onto a wagon that afternoon. Marta watched a stranger drive it off, and Selma stood in the empty doorway of her empty house, and then Selma took the Thursday train east, and Marta never saw her again for a long, long time. And it wasn't only Selma saying it. It was all of them. That's the part I need you to feel. It was the whole world, and the whole world was being kind. The banker in Glasgow, a decent man, a churchgoer, no villain, sent Marta a letter that said her account was thin and her husband's note was coming due, and that no one would think the less of her for selling the team and the seed and coming in off that hard ground before another winter. The pastor's wife brought a hot dish and held Marta's hands in the cold kitchen and said God did not ask a widow to break sod. And her own mother wrote from Wisconsin, in a shaking, careful hand, 3 pages of love, and the whole of it came down to one line. "Come home, Marta. No one expects a crop from you this year. Sell the seed. Sell the team. Bring my grandbabies home. No one expects a crop from you this year." Everyone said it. Everyone, and every one of them meant it as a mercy. Hold that. Hold that in your 2 hands, because it is the whole hinge of this story, and Marta did not see it yet either. She heard mercy, and she was grateful for it, and she came very near to taking it. Because grief is heavy, and she was 34. And she had 2 children and a dead husband and 320 acres of the hardest ground God ever made, and the whole world was standing at her door with its hat in its hand saying, "Rest, child. Rest. You've earned your rest." She started sorting Anders's things. That was the week after Selma left. You have to, eventually. She got down the tin box off the shelf over the bed, the flat black box with the dent in the lid, and she went through his papers for the ones the burial needed, the enlistment record, the little photograph, the letters she'd read 100 times. And in the bottom of the box, under all of it, was a folded government notice from the land office at Glasgow. The cultivation notice, the one they'd sent years back, that laid out in dry clerk's language exactly how many acres had to be broken and cropped, and by what year, for the claim to prove up whole. Marta barely looked at it. The lid of the tin box wouldn't sit flat. The hinge was sprung. So she folded that land notice into a wad and wedged it under the lip to hold the lid down, and she went on sorting the papers that mattered. That was all. A folded paper wedging a broken lid. She'd remember it later. She'd remember it the rest of her life. But that day it was nothing. That day it held down a box. Then came the day on the church steps. They held a memorial at Corliss for all the Corliss men, 6 of them, 6 names, read out slow while the wind came across the flat and took the words apart. The whole line came in for it. Wagons and a few Fords and folk who'd walked. And Marta stood on the steps after, with Joran's hand in hers and Lars against her skirt, and that was when Royce Dunmore came up the steps with papers in his hand. He did it in front of everyone. That was the thing about it. That was the wound of it. Mrs. Halvorsen, he tipped his hat, very polite, very soft. I'm sorry for your loss. Truly, but you should have this today rather than be surprised by it. And he put the papers in her free hand. She looked down. It was a contest. Filed at the Glasgow District Land Office. A formal claim against her entry, against Anders's entry, swearing that the cultivation on the Halvorsen section was lapsed, that the acres required were not broken and cropped, and that the claim was therefore open and could be entered by another. By him. Royce Dunmore had filed to take her land out from under her before her husband's memorial had even let out. The steps went quiet. 60 miles of that line was standing on those steps, and they all heard him, because he did not trouble to lower his voice. Grief plows nothing, Mrs. Halvorsen, Royce Dunmore said. Your acres aren't there. They won't be there. A woman alone with 2 little ones can't put in a section, and everyone here knows it, and there's no shame in you knowing it too. Sign the bill. Take the train. Go home to your mother. And the terrible thing, the thing that made Marta's face go hot, was that half the folk on those steps were nodding. Gently, sadly, because he was saying what they'd all been saying. He was cruel, and they were kind, and the words coming out were the very same words. No one expects a crop from you this year. She did not cry there either. She put the contest papers into her apron band, right alongside the folded telegram, so that she carried the 2 of them together against her hip. The paper the country sent to end her husband, and the paper this man sent to end her. 2 papers. She would carry both of those a long way before this was over. That night she did not sleep. She sat at the table with the lamp low and the children breathing in the next room, and she took Anders's contest papers back out and she read the words she did not understand, the legal words, contest and cultivation and lapse and entry, and she understood only that a stranger was allowed to do this. That the law let him. That somewhere there was a rule that said her grief did not matter, and this soft-handed man had read that rule, and she had not. So in the morning, before the frost was off the glass, she left the children with the Pruitt girl down the coulee, and she hitched Enoch Pruitt's old team, because her own was mortgaged to the note, and she drove the 11 miles into Glasgow to the district land office. And she asked the clerk at the raised counter to let her read the statute. The whole of it. Every word. He was surprised. I think he was surprised. Women came into that office to sign and to weep and to sell, and here was one who set her jaw and asked to read the law herself. But he got the book down, and he set it on the counter, and he showed her the entry, the enlarged Homestead entry, and the sections that governed it. And Marta Halvorsen stood at that plank counter in her black dress, with a wind coming under the door, and she read. It took her most of the morning. She read slow, because the words fought her, and she read some parts 3 and 4 times. And piece by piece, the thing came clear, and it was worse than she'd feared, and it was also, though she didn't see it yet, the door out. Here is what she learned. When Anders died, she did not simply lose him. Under the entry, a widow succeeded to her husband's claim. The law gave her that. The land could pass to her, the years he'd already earned could pass to her, all 9 of them. She succeeded to his claim. But she did not succeed to his time. That was the blade in it. The law gave her the claim, but it did not stop the clock. The proving year was the proving year, fixed, set down when Anders first filed, and it did not move because a man died in France. The acres still had to be broken. The crop still had to be put in. By the date. And if the date came and the acres were not there, if a spring went by and the ground sat idle, then the cultivation was lapsed. And the moment it lapsed, the claim stood open. And any stranger, any soft-handed stranger with a filing fee in his coat, could swear a contest and file to take it. Marta stood very still at that counter. Because she saw it then. She saw the whole shape of it. All at once, the way you see the whole prairie when the lightning goes off at night. It came to her cold and complete, and it took her breath. Grief was not in the statute. She read the pages again to be sure, hunting for it. For some line that said a widow was owed a season. That a woman who buried a husband might have 1 year to grieve before the clock ran again. It was not there. Not one word. The law did not know she was grieving. The law did not care. The law counted acres, and it counted dates, and that was the whole of its heart. A spring for mourning. A year to bury her dead and get her feet back under her, the thing every kind soul on that line had pressed on her as mercy. The law simply did not recognize that such a thing existed. And then the colder thought. The one that turned her hands to ice on that counter. The contest men knew this. Royce Dunmore knew this. That was his trade. He did not file at random. He read the death notices and he watched the sale bills climb the elevator walls, and he waited. He waited for the widows to do the one thing that was most natural and most human and most encouraged in all the world. He waited for them to grieve. He waited for them to take the merciful advice of every good person around them, to sell the seed and sell the team and let the spring go by idle. Because no one expects a crop from you this year. And the moment that idle spring passed and the acres were not there, the cultivation lapsed by the plain letter of the law, and he swore his contest, and the land fell into his hand like a ripe apple. The mercy was the mechanism. Do you understand? That was the trap, and it was perfect, and it was invisible, because it wore the face of kindness. The banker and the pastor's wife and her own weeping mother in Wisconsin, and behind them Royce Dunmore with his hat in his hand, they were all, every one of them, saying the same words, and the words all led to the same idle spring, and the idle spring was a signature. A widow who rested her season signed her land away without ever touching a pen. She thought she was grieving. The statute recorded it as a lapse. 200 widows down that line were being counseled, gently, lovingly, right into the contest man's arms. A spring skipped was not rest. A spring skipped was a signature. Marta closed the book. The clerk asked if she'd found what she needed. She said she had. She said thank you, and she meant it. And she walked out into the hard white light of the Glasgow street where Enoch Pruitt's old team stood hipshot at the rail, and she stood there a moment with her hand on the wagon wheel. And she thought about the tin box. She thought about the folded paper wedged under the sprung lid, the cultivation notice she'd used for a shim without a second glance. It had been sitting in that box the whole winter. It had been sitting there while the world told her to sell. The one paper that laid out exactly what the land required had been under her own roof, holding down a broken hinge. The entire time the contest men were counting on her never to read it. The answer had been in the drawer the whole time. It was not hidden in some vault. It was not lost. It was folded up under a box lid because a grieving woman had not thought it worth a look. She drove the 11 miles home. She did not hurry the team. She had a great deal to think about. And the bench gives you room to think. By the time she pulled into her own yard, past the good barn Anders freighted lumber for, and the fields lying dead and gray under the last of the frost, she had stopped grieving in the way the world wanted her to grieve. She had not stopped missing him. She would miss him every day of her life. But she had stopped mistaking mercy for mercy. She had seen the shape of the thing, and once you have seen the shape of a trap, you cannot unsee it, and you cannot walk into it smiling anymore. That evening she got down the tin box. She worked the folded cultivation notice out from under the lid, and she smoothed it flat on the table under the lamp, the paper she'd shimmed a hinge with, and she read what the land actually asked of her. The acres. The date. The crop. It was all right there in the dry clerk's words. It was not gentle, and it was not impossible. It was a bargain, the same bargain it had always been. Blood and sweat, measured in broken acres, against a piece of paper. Joran woke and came out in her nightdress, 9 years old and too watchful for her age, the way children get when the house has known death. "Mama," she said, "are we going to Grandma's? Everybody says we're going to Grandma's." Marta looked at her girl a long moment. Then she looked past her, to where Lars slept, 6 years old, Anders's cowlick, Anders's stubborn chin. "No," Marta said. "We're not going to Grandma's." "But everybody says," "I know what everybody says." She folded the land notice, gently this time, and set it in the center of the table where she could see it. "Everybody's being kind. But kind isn't the same as right, and I've been letting the two get mixed up. We're not selling the seed, Joran. We're not selling the team. And we're not letting this spring go by." The girl's eyes were very wide in the lamplight. "Your father stood right out there on the step," Marta said, "the summer before he went, and he told me we'd put in a full crop that spring, prove it up, and no one could ever take this ground. So that's what we're going to do. Not 80 acres. Not the little corner the law counts as enough. The whole of it. Every acre your father and I ever broke. And then some. A full crop. The full section." She said it out loud in her own kitchen, and it settled over the room like a thing decided. The next morning she wrote 3 letters. One to the banker in Glasgow. She would not be selling, she would hold to the note and pay it out of the crop. One to her mother in Wisconsin, kind and short. The grandbabies were staying on their father's land, and would her mother pray for rain? And the third to the district land office, a plain declaration of her intent that as the widow succeeding to the Halvorsen entry, she would meet the cultivation herself, in full, before the proving date, and she signed her own name to it, Marta Halvorsen, in a firm, clear hand. She signed nothing else. Not the sale bill, not the surrender. Not a single one of the papers the whole world was holding out to her. She refused the mercy that was a mechanism, and she put her name only to the one paper that bound her to the plow. Then she went out to the barn in the cold morning, and she looked at Enoch Pruitt's borrowed team, and at the plow, and at 320 acres of dead gray sod she was proposing to break with 2 small children, and no husband, and a spring that had already half slipped away from her. And out on the county road, small in the distance, a buggy came along at an easy trot, in no hurry at all, a soft-handed man in a good coat, driving out to see how his contest was ripening, certain, absolutely certain, that the widow on the bench would fold like all the rest before the frost was fully out of the ground. He did not yet know she had read the fine print. He did not yet know what she'd found holding down a broken box lid. He tipped his hat to her across the cold field, sure as sunrise that this land was already his. Marta picked up the reins. And the old team leaned into the traces, and the first cut of dead sod came up black and root-bound behind the share. It was slow work. It was ugly work. Enoch Pruitt's team was 15 years past its best, and the near horse favored a hind leg, and the plow rode up out of the ground every time it struck a stone the size of a fist. She learned to lean on the handles. She learned to watch the horse's ears and stop before they blew. Joran walked at the heads with a hand on the bridle, 9 years old and grave as a deacon. Lars followed in the furrow and picked stones into a bucket, 6 years old, Anders's cowlick standing up in the wind. They broke ground before the frost was fully out. That was the whole gamble. Everyone told her to wait for the ground to warm, and everyone who told her that had a reason to want her waiting. She did not wait. She turned 40 acres in the first 11 days, and her hands split at the knuckles, and she wrapped them in strips of an old shirt of Anders's and kept the reins. Then the weather turned on her. A late blizzard came down off the High Line in the last week, the kind of spring storm that has no business existing, and it caught the team in the open. Marta got the children to the house. She went back for the horses. She found them humped against the fence with their tails to the wind, and she got them into the barn, and in the morning the near horse could not put weight on the favored leg at all. Enoch Pruitt walked up the coulee through the drifts to look at it. He was a broke old man with a bad hip and a way of standing quiet before he spoke. He ran his hand down the horse's cannon bone and pressed, and the horse flinched. "Not broke," he said. Wrenched, he went down on the ice. "How long?" Marta said. 2 weeks, maybe 3. He straightened up slow. "You don't have 3 weeks." "No," she said. "I don't." He looked out at the white field and the black cut she'd already made in it, and something moved in his face that she couldn't read. "I got a sled and a scraper and 1 sound mule," he said. "It ain't a team, but it'll pull a light plow if you don't ask it to be proud about it. And I got a back that don't do much good sitting in my own kitchen." "Enoch, don't," he said. "My wife's 10 years gone, and my quarters blew away in 15, and I'm no use to a living soul from 1 week to the next. You're going to let me be some use. That's all this is." So the two of them broke ground with a lame horse standing in the barn, and a borrowed mule leaning into a light plow, an old man and a widow and 2 children turning the Milk River bench a furrow at a time. The frost came out. The horse mended enough to walk in the traces by the 2nd week. They lost days they could not afford, and they made them back in the long light, working till the children fell asleep in the wagon box with dirt in their hair. And down on the county road, now and again, a buggy would slow. A soft-handed man in a good coat would sit and watch a while, in no hurry, and lift his hat and drive on. Royce Dunmore, come to see how his contest was ripening. He counted the days on his side. He watched a woman kill a lame team on cold ground, and he saw a widow who could not last, and he tipped his hat to her like a man being gracious about a thing already settled. Marta did not wave. She did not stop. She set the mule's head at the far fence and cut the next furrow. The seed went in when the ground was ready and not before. She kept the seed sack in the house, not the barn. It had ridden out from Glasgow under a blanket in the wagon, and she had told no one what was in it. Because a woman who buys a full section of seed grain is a woman making a statement, and she did not want the statement made for her before she was ready to make it herself. She sewed the sacks shut. She hauled them to the field in the gray of morning. She broadcast by hand off the tailgate, and the children walked behind and covered, and the whole of 320 acres took its seed into the ground a strip at a time. Then the sky closed up and gave her nothing. 11 days without rain. The seed lay in the dust, and the dust blew, and the field turned the color of an old bone. She stood at the wire in the evenings and looked at it and said nothing to the children, because there was nothing to say that a 9-year-old should have to carry. Joran looked at her mother's face and looked at the field and understood more than a child ought to. On the 11th day, Dunmore came up the road and did not drive on. He stopped his buggy at the gate and sat there with his forearms on his knees, easy as a man visiting a neighbor. "Mrs. Halvorsen," he said, "that's a lot of dry ground." "It is," she said. "A body has to admire it. Truly, all that work." He shook his head like a man at a funeral. "But you know how this country is. It'll take everything you've got and give you a dust bowl for thanks. I've seen it break stronger backs than yours." He reached into the good coat and came out with an envelope, and he held it across the wire. "Patient, there's train fare in there. Fare east, for you and the little ones, and enough over to start clean. No papers to sign. Consider it a kindness between neighbors. When you're ready. And you'll be ready." She looked at the envelope. She did not take it. The merciful people had been coming all along, and they were gentler than he was, which somehow made it worse. Selma Ostgaard's cousin had sent a letter with fare in it, for when she was ready. The pastor's wife had come with a jar of preserves and the news that a place had opened at her sister's boarding house in Fargo, for when she was ready. Her own mother wrote every week now, all love, all grief, all the same sentence underneath it. Come home, no one expects a crop, come home. They all said it the same way. They all said it kindly. Every one of them was handing her the fare east, and every one of them believed they were being good to her, and not a single one of them had read the paragraph that said a spring skipped was a signature. She had read it. She kept reading it, in her head in the field at the wire in the dark. "Put it away, Mr. Dunmore," she said. He smiled, unbothered. "The offer stands." "It'll rain," she said. "Everyone says that," he said, and tucked the envelope back and lifted his hat and drove on, certain as he had ever been. On the 12th day it rained. It came in the afternoon with no wind ahead of it, a slow soaking rain that walked up the bench from the river and stayed. And it rained into the night, and Marta stood in the doorway with Lars asleep against her shoulder and listened to it come down on the roof and on 320 acres of buried seed, and she did not weep on the telegram, and she did not weep on the contest, and she wept on the rain, quietly, so the children wouldn't hear. In the morning there was nothing to see. In a week there was a green so faint you had to kneel to be sure. In 2 weeks it stood in rows you could read from the road, on all 4 quarters, the whole section coming up green at once, and a person driving by could not pretend it wasn't there. Now the waiting turned around on the ones who'd been doing it. Dunmore drove by and did not stop. The neighbors who'd brought fare found reasons not to bring more. The green came up and kept coming, knee-high, then higher, heading out, and the field book Marta kept on the kitchen shelf filled with dates and acres and rainfall in her plain hand. She was building more than a crop. She was building a record. Because she had read what a hearing wants, and a hearing wants proof a stranger can swear to. So she made witnesses. Enoch Pruitt walked the rows with her, quarter by quarter, and 2 other neighbors down the coulee walked them too, so there'd be men who could stand up and say with their own mouths, "I saw it. I walked it. It was there." The empty seed sack she hung on a nail in the barn, and it hung there through the summer, flat and light, a thing that had done its work. She let herself believe, a little, that she was going to make it clean. Then, 11 days before the proving date, the summer tried to take it all back at once. It came in 3 blows, close together, the way trouble does when it's been waiting. The first was the sky. A hail line came down the high line in the evening, a black wall with white teeth. And it walked across the northeast corner of her section and stripped the standing wheat on that quarter down to green rags in the space of a few minutes, and then it moved on and left the other 3 quarters standing and dripping and whole. She stood in it while it fell and could not do one thing about it. When it stopped, she walked the northeast quarter in the last light and saw a year of a child's future beaten flat into the mud, and she made herself do the only useful thing there was to do, which was to count what was left standing everywhere else. The second blow came in the mail. A credit lien, filed by the Sears house against the seed and the implement she'd bought on time out of the catalog in the spring. A paper that could tie up the crop before she ever proved the land, if a man knew how to use it, and one man did. Because the third blow was Dunmore. He did not wait for the proving date. He advanced it. He swore an affidavit at the Glasgow office that the Halvorsen cultivation was not there, that the widow had let it lapse, that the contest should be heard at once, and he timed it to the hail, because word travels, and he had heard about the northeast quarter, and he thought the hail had done for her what the winter and the drought had failed to do. He set the hearing for the 12th day. Marta read the notice at her own table by lamplight with the children asleep. Her hands did not shake. She had gotten past the part where her hands shook. She took the tin box down off the shelf over the bed, the flat black tin with the dented lid and the sprung hinge. and she lifted the lid that no longer needed the cultivation notice to steady it, because that paper was long since smoothed flat and studied and known by heart. She took out Anders's entry paper. She unfolded the War Department form that had ridden in her apron band all summer, soft now at the creases from her thumb. She laid them side by side. Then she folded the telegram back up and put it where she always kept it, in the band of her apron against her hip, where she could feel it. "We're going to Glasgow," she told Joran in the morning. "All of us. In the good clothes." The Glasgow District Land Office had a plank floor and a raised counter and a cold, clear plains morning coming in through the tall windows. Marta got there early, in the wagon, with the children scrubbed and the field book under her arm and the telegram in her apron band. There were rigs at the hitching rail. She had not asked for that. Enoch Pruitt's wagon was there, and behind it, down the rail, 11 more neighbor rigs, families off the bench and up the coulee, men who'd walked her rows and women who'd watched her not leave, come the 11 miles into town to stand in a land office on a working morning, because a thing was going to be settled and they wanted to be in the room. Selma Ostgaard was there too, in the back, in her traveling coat, come all the way from the east on the train, because word had reached her and she could not stay away. She'd sold her cookstove. She'd sold her team. She sat in the back with her hands in her lap and her eyes on Marta. Royce Dunmore came in last, in the good coat, with his affidavit in a leather folder and the ease of a man who has never once lost. He nodded to the register. He nodded to Marta, almost kind. He did not look at the neighbors along the wall. Register Amos Wexler sat up at the raised counter with the Halvorsen file open in front of him. He was a dry man with spectacles and no interest in either of them, which was exactly what Marta had prayed for, because the statute did not care about grief, and neither did he, and today that was going to save her instead of sink her. Dunmore spoke first. He was smooth. He laid out the contest. A widow, God rest her husband, unable to meet the cultivation. A lapsed entry, hail across the crop. A claim that could not be proved, and a filing fee already paid, and an orderly transfer of the land to a party ready to make it produce. He said grief plows nothing, and he said it gently. For the room. He set his affidavit on the counter. Wexler let him finish. Then he looked down at the file and up over his spectacles at Marta, and he asked the one question the whole thing turned on. "How many acres in crop, Mrs. Halvorsen?" The room went still. Selma's hand rose halfway to her mouth. Dunmore looked at Marta with the beginning of a smile, waiting for the small number, the 80. The required minimum a widow might scrape, or the nothing the hail had made of it. Marta stood level, the field book in her hand, the folded telegram showing at her apron band. 320, she said. The full section. Every acre broken and cropped this spring. She did not stop there. She had read what a hearing needs. The northeast quarter was hailed out 11 days ago, she said. I'll not claim it. But the statute asks for cultivation, and it asks for 80. I put in 320. Take the hailed quarter clean off the count, and what's standing green this morning is more than 3 times over what the entry requires. I have the dates. I have the rainfall. And I have men who walked every row. Wexler looked at the leather folder, and at Dunmore's affidavit, and back at her. Can that be sworn? He said. Enoch Pruitt came off the wall before anyone could ask him twice. He put his hand up, that broke old man with the bad hip, and he swore it, the acres, the rows, the standing crop, quarter by quarter in his own plain words. And then the 2 neighbors from down the coulee swore it after him, and a 4th man stood up who hadn't been asked, and said he'd hauled her seed himself in the spring, and there was a full section of it in the ground, and he'd stake his own claim on it. The number held. Wexler wrote for a while in the quiet. Then he looked at Dunmore. Your contest is on the cultivation, Mr. Dunmore, he said. You've sworn it isn't there. It's there. It's there 4 times over, with witnesses, less the hailed quarter she's given up herself. He set the affidavit to one side of the file with 2 fingers, the way a man sets aside a thing that has become useless. The entry stands. The widow succeeds. Contest dismissed. He said it dry, the way he said everything, and it landed on that plank floor like a stone dropped into a well. And then Marta watched the room, one face at a time, because she had earned the watching. Royce Dunmore did not move for a moment. The smooth had gone out of his face by inches. He had built the whole thing on a woman who would fold, on grief doing his work for him, on the mercy the whole country had pressed on her being the very thing that surrendered her land, a spring skipped, a signature made without a pen. He had never once read the file for a woman who read it back. His own weapon was the cultivation clause, and she had answered it with cultivation, in surplus, out loud, in front of the room he had chosen to humiliate her in. He picked up his folder. He had nothing to say that would help him, and for once he seemed to know it, and he went out past the neighbors along the wall, and not one of them moved to let him by easy. The banker was there. She hadn't seen him come in. The man who'd urged her to sell and go home to her mother. He was looking at his own hands, turning his hat in them, and he did not lift his eyes to her. And Selma Ostgard, in the back, in the traveling coat, took her hand away from her mouth, and her eyes were full. Because she understood it now, all of it, in the space of one dismissed contest. She had gotten the same printed telegram that winter. She had had the same team, the same seed, the same section of ground, and the same right buried in the same statute, in this same courthouse drawer. And she had sold her cookstove and taken the train. Because everyone told her no one expected a crop, and everyone had been kind, and everyone had been wrong. She had sold a crop she could have stood on. She had signed away her land without ever signing a thing. That was the whole of it, standing in that cold plain room. The country had sent Marta Halvorsen a printed paper that winter to tell her the man was gone and the land might as well go with him. And the answer to that paper had been sitting in a drawer in this same building the entire time. A paragraph her husband had filed 9 years before she needed it. A clause the contest men prayed no widow would ever read. The mercy had been the mechanism. The Mercy had emptied 60 miles of one railroad, 200 widows selling teams and cookstoves down the line, 200 telegrams answered with sale bills. 200 wives on that line did the expected thing. She was the only one who read the fine print. Marta gathered up her field book. She took Lars's hand and put her other hand on Joran's shoulder, and she walked out of the Glasgow land office into the cold, clear morning, past the neighbors who fell in around her, and she did not look back at the man in the good coat, because there was nothing back there she needed anymore. The harvest came in late summer, a year on from the worst of it. There is a light on standing wheat in that country in the long evenings, a low gold light that comes across the bench and lies down flat in the heads and makes the whole field seem lit from underneath. Joran and Lars were out in it, stooking, 10 and 7 now, brown as the ground, Anders's cowlick still standing up on the buoy in the wind. The crop had made. Not rich. This country is never rich. But it had made, on 3/4 full and the 4th come back green over the hailed ground, and it had paid the note and the lien and left seed for another year, which on the Milk River bench is the only wealth there is. The empty seed sack still hung on its nail in the barn, flat and gray, and she left it there. It had done its work and it could hang there as long as the barn stood. Next door, across the wire, the abandoned entry told the other story. Some man had walked away from it the year the telegrams came, gone east on the train like the rest, and it had gone to Russian thistle and drifted soil, the furrows filled in, the sod healing over gray. It sat there beside her section in full head, and you could read the whole thing off the fence line without a word being said. One entry read the paper the country sent. One entry read the paper in the drawer. She had taken the telegram out of her apron band. At last. She had unfolded it, all the way, the soft worn creases of it, the blanks typed in over the adjutant general's name, October the Meuse Argonne, a month before the bells. She pressed it flat and laid it in the family Bible next to Anders's entry paper. The two of them together, the paper that said the man was gone and the paper that kept his land. That was where they belonged, side by side. She closed the book on them both. Word came that Dunmore had moved on. He'd taken his filings to the next line down the railroad, hunting fresh sale bills, fresh widows, fresh grief to time his contests to. And Marta thought about the women down that line and hoped one of them, somewhere, was a quiet woman who read. Selma wrote from the east, a kind letter, a little sad, and Marta wrote back kindly and briefly and did not say the one thing that could not be unsaid, because Selma already knew it, and knowing it was punishment enough. Everyone had allowed her grief. The banker, the pastor's wife, her own mother, Selma, the whole merciful line. Every one of them had told her to sit down in her sorrow and let the land go, and every one of them had loved her while they said it. That was the thing she carried now, out in the gold light, watching her children stook the wheat their father broke this ground to grow. Everyone allowed her grief. The statute never had. And in the end the statute was the only one of them that had told her the truth. She stood a while longer at the edge of the field. Then she went in to make the supper on her own land that no one was ever going to take. If you're out there tonight watching a quiet person get told to sit down and go home, comment the state you're watching from. And tell me how far down the line this story still travels. The wheat came off clean on the south and west quarters, and thin on the northeast where the hail had clipped it, but it came off. Enoch Pruitt ran the binder on the south field and would not take $1 for it, and Marta fed him and his boy at the kitchen table and did not make a ceremony of the gratitude, because Enoch did not want ceremony, he wanted to be useful, and she had given him that. Joran carried water to the men. Lars was small, but he stooking beside his sister without being asked, learning the work the way children learn it, by watching and then doing and then not thinking about it anymore. The abandoned quarter to the north had gone fast the way ground goes fast when no one works it. Russian thistle rolled against the fence line where Anders had strung it the summer before he went. Volunteer wheat came up in one corner, thin and tilting, a ghost row from some prior tenant who had left seed in the soil, but it was nothing. The ground was drifted already, working itself loose along the surface, and by spring it would be sculpted wrong. She looked at it once and did not look again. There was her field, and there was that field, and the difference between them was not grief, because both farms had grief enough. The seed sack hung on the nail by the barn door all through threshing. She had thought she might take it down and burn it or bury it as a kind of marker for the thing that had happened, but in the end she left it there. It was only a sack. It had done its work. Maybe it would do its work again, next spring, if the elevator would extend her on the strength of what she had threshed. And she believed they would, because now the numbers were there, and numbers were what elevators spoke. The children slept hard in those weeks, the full, hard sleep of worked bodies. And at night she sat at the table, with the lamp turned low, and did not write in the ledger, and did not read, and did not plan, just sat and let the quiet in. It was a different quiet than the winter had been. The winter quiet had a shape to it, the shape of everything held waiting. And this quiet was just quiet. Her own. The land outside was hers. The dark was hers. The lamp was hers. She was tired all the way down to the place where tired becomes something else, something almost like peace. If you're out there tonight watching a quiet person get told to sit down and go home, comment the state you're watching from, and tell me how far down the line this story still travels.